Some people do not raise their voice, do not threaten you, do not even stay in your life for long, and yet they still manage to control your entire emotional state. One cold message changes your mood. One moment of disrespect ruins your peace. One rejection stays in your head for days. And without noticing it, you start living as if your inner world belongs to whoever knows how to disturb it. That is the trap. Most people think emotional control happens through force. The Stoics saw something deeper. It happens through permission. The moment another person can decide whether you feel calm or anxious, confident or insecure, centered or broken, they have already entered a place they were never supposed to occupy. They are no longer influencing your day. They are governing your mind. Epictetus taught this with brutal clarity in the Enchiridion of Epictetus, section 1, when he separates what is within our control from what is not. The problem is that most people understand this idea with the mind, but not with their life. They still hand over their peace to opinions, attitudes, moods, silence, disrespect, and emotional games. They still expect stability from unstable people. They still let someone else's chaos become their own weather. This video is about ending that pattern, not by becoming cold, distant, or emotionless, but by becoming stronger where it matters most. Strong enough to feel without collapsing. Clear enough to see manipulation without absorbing it. Disciplined enough to stop reacting like a prisoner to every external movement. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 8, paragraph 47, that the mind can turn away from disturbance and find its own quiet. That is not poetic language. That is a survival skill. Because if you do not rule your emotions, someone else will keep trying to, sometimes through criticism, sometimes through guilt, sometimes through withdrawal, sometimes through approval. And the most dangerous part is that it often looks normal. It looks like daily life. It looks like relationships. It looks like social pressure. It looks like caring too much about what people think. But underneath all of it is the same loss of power. You stop being the owner of your inner state. Stop renting out your inner weather. Most people never notice the exact moment they lose control of their emotions. It does not usually happen in a dramatic way. No one announces it. No alarm goes off. It happens in small familiar moments that seem harmless at first. A message comes in with a colder tone than expected. Someone answers you with indifference. A person you care about seems distant for a few hours. A stranger speaks with unnecessary harshness, and just like that, your peace begins to shift. Your breathing changes. Your thoughts get heavier. Your mood darkens. The day is no longer being shaped by your values, your judgment, or your intentions. It is being shaped by someone else's behavior. That is how emotional dependence begins, quietly, subtly, almost invisibly. And the Stoics would tell you that this is one of the most dangerous forms of weakness, because it turns your inner life into rented property. When you rent out your inner weather, you give other people the right to decide whether your day will feel light or heavy, clear or cloudy, peaceful or agitated. You may still look composed on the outside, but inside, you are being moved by forces you never chose. One person's mood becomes your atmosphere. One person's tension becomes your tension. One person's instability becomes the lens through which you see the rest of the day. This is exhausting, not only because it hurts, but because it keeps you in a permanent state of emotional vulnerability. You are always waiting for the next tone, the next reaction, the next sign of approval or rejection to tell you how to feel. At that point, you are no longer living from inner authority. You are living from emotional exposure. This is why Stoicism begins with a hard but liberating truth. Your peace becomes fragile the moment it depends on what other people do. Epictetus makes this brutally clear in the Enchiridion of Epictetus, section 1, when he teaches that some things are within our control and some are not. Most people hear that and think of big events, money, status, illness, success. But the real battlefield is often much smaller and much more intimate. It is the battlefield of mood, interpretation, reaction. Someone else's silence is not within your control. Someone else's attitude is not within your control. Someone else's emotional confusion is not within your control. But whether you turn their instability into your personal climate, that is where your freedom begins or ends. Look at how often people confuse contact with contamination. They think that because they encountered anger, they must now carry anger. Because they were treated coldly, they must now become cold inside. Because someone brought emotional chaos into the room, they must now breathe in that chaos and make it part of themselves. But the Stoic does not live that way. The Stoic understands that contact is inevitable, but absorption is a choice. You can witness someone's bitterness without making it your blood. You can experience another person's tension without letting it colonize your mind. You can see their storm clearly and still refuse to call it your sky. Marcus Aurelius returns to this inner discipline again and again in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. He keeps reminding himself that the soul can preserve its own color if it does not surrender itself to impressions. That matters because most emotional suffering does not come from the first event. It comes from the permission we give that event to remain active inside us. Someone speaks sharply, and the mind does not stop there. It replays the scene. It adds meaning. It starts asking what it says about us. It predicts what might happen next. It builds a weather system out of a single passing cloud. What could have remained a moment becomes a mood. What could have remained outside becomes internal climate. What could have passed through becomes something we host. And once this pattern becomes normal, people begin to think it is just part of being sensitive, part of caring, part of being human. But there is a difference between feeling and surrendering. There is a difference between being affected for a moment and being governed all day. There is a difference between noticing emotional friction and handing over the keys to your nervous system. The Stoic is not someone who feels nothing. The Stoic is someone who refuses to let feeling become servitude. Seneca points toward this strength in Letters from a Stoic by Seneca, Letter 11, where he shows that the wise person is not made of stone, but is also not easily thrown into disorder by every external disturbance. That is the balance. Not numbness, not coldness, mastery. Think about how many people spend their lives emotionally available to every passing influence. If someone smiles at them, they feel secure. If someone withdraws, they feel anxious. If someone praises them, they rise. If someone criticizes them, they collapse. This is not peace, this is emotional tenancy. It means your inner state is being leased to the outside world, one interaction at a time. And the price is always too high. Because when your climate is controlled from outside, your mind never truly rests. You're always adjusting yourself to what others bring. You become reactive without realizing it. You become trainable, predictable, easy to shake, easy to manipulate, easy to wound. People who want control over others understand this instinctively, even if they never say it out loud. They know that if they can control the emotional atmosphere around you, they can influence your choices. A little distance can make you chase. A little coldness can make you explain yourself. A little unpredictability can make you obsess. A little approval can make you dependent. This is why emotional discipline is not just a private virtue. It is a form of protection. When your inner weather belongs to you, manipulation loses much of its power. The person who cannot be easily thrown into confusion is much harder to control. But this requires a different way of seeing daily interactions. It means you stop asking, why are they making me feel this way, and start asking, why am I letting their state become my state? That question changes everything because it brings responsibility back to the only place where real power exists. You may not control their tone, but you control whether that tone enters your identity. You may not control their distance, but you control whether that distance becomes panic. You may not control their irritation, but you control whether their fire finds fuel in you. This is not blame, it is freedom. It is the moment you stop waiting for better people to give you peace and start building peace that does not depend on them. There is also something deeply dignified about this shift. When you stop renting out your inner weather, you no longer beg the world to handle you gently. You stop needing every room to feel safe before you can remain steady. You stop expecting every person to be fair, mature, warm, or self-aware before your mind can stay clear. You become less fragile because your peace is no longer borrowed from other people's behavior. It is rooted in something far more stable: your judgment, your discipline, your self-command. That does not mean you will never feel the sting of disrespect, or the ache of distance. You will. The Stoics never asked you to become a machine. What they ask is more demanding and more powerful. They ask you to feel the moment without becoming the moment, to recognize the disturbance without handing it authority, to say, this is unpleasant, but it does not get to rule me. This is painful, but it does not get to define my day. This is their mood, not my destiny. That is what inner government sounds like. And when you begin to live this way, something remarkable happens. You stop being emotionally dragged through life by the changing faces, voices, opinions, and tensions of other people. You become harder to provoke, harder to darken, harder to destabilize. Not because life gets easier, but because your center gets stronger. You start walking into rooms without unconsciously absorbing them. You start hearing tone without building identity around it. You start noticing emotional pressure without kneeling to it. Your calm becomes less accidental and more intentional. This first rule matters because everything else depends on it. If other people can control your inner weather, then they can influence the quality of your thoughts, the sharpness of your judgment, and the direction of your actions. Once they can change your climate, they can begin to shape your world. But when you take that climate back, you reclaim more than peace. You reclaim authorship. You reclaim self-possession. And from there, the next hard truth becomes impossible to ignore. Many people do not just let others affect their mood, they also let others decide what they are worth. Do not confuse someone's behavior with your worth. One of the fastest ways people lose emotional freedom is by turning someone else's behavior into a verdict about themselves. A person becomes distant, and they immediately wonder what is wrong with them. Someone speaks with cruelty, and they begin to feel smaller. Someone ignores them, rejects them, disrespects them, or fails to value them, and instead of seeing the other person's conduct for what it is, they absorb it as personal truth. This is where emotional pain deepens. The original wound may come from what someone did, but the lasting damage often comes from the meaning you attach to it. You stop seeing their behavior as an expression of their character, their confusion, their limitations, their ego, or their emotional disorder. You start seeing it as evidence that you are lacking something, and that is how another person's actions begin to rewrite your identity. This happens every day in ways that seem normal. Someone does not reply with the same warmth they had before, and your mind does not simply register the change. It translates it into self-doubt. Someone criticizes you unfairly, and instead of examining the criticism with clarity, you let it sink directly into your sense of worth. Someone treats you as if you are easy to dismiss, and without noticing it, you begin to question your value. This is not just sensitivity, it is confusion. It is the confusion of thinking that because someone failed to see you correctly, they must have seen you truthfully. The Stoics would tell you that this is a serious mistake, because the opinions and behaviors of others often reveal far more about them than they ever reveal about you. Epictetus was relentless on this point. In the discourses of Epictetus, he returns again and again to the principle that what harms us is not the event itself, but the judgment we form about it. That matters here because another person's coldness is an event. Another person's insult is an event. Another person's rejection is an event. But the thought, this means I am not enough, that is a judgment, and once that judgment is accepted, the pain becomes intimate. It enters your self-concept. It no longer feels like something that happened around you. It feels like something that exposed you. This is why so many people stay wounded long after the actual moment has passed. They are not only remembering what the other person did, they are still living inside the false conclusion they drew from it. The Stoic mind refuses to make that leap. It pauses and asks a harder, cleaner question. Is this person's behavior really measuring my worth, or is it merely displaying their state of mind, their habits, their maturity, their fears, their values, or their lack of discipline? That question restores proportion. Because not everyone who rejects you has judged you correctly. Not everyone who overlooks you has seen you fully. Not everyone who speaks harshly has earned the authority to define you. Marcus Aurelius understood this deeply. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 2, Paragraph 1, he prepares himself to meet people who are interfering, ungrateful, arrogant, deceitful, envious, and antisocial. Notice what he is doing there. He is not saying those people are right about him. He is saying they are acting according to the condition of their own mind. That distinction is everything. A bitter person will often speak from bitterness, not from truth. A shallow person will often judge from shallowness, not from wisdom. An insecure person may belittle others to feel taller. A manipulative person may withdraw warmth to create dependence. A proud person may dismiss what they secretly feel threatened by. None of this automatically says anything accurate about your value, but if you lack inner stability, you will read their behavior as revelation. You will assume that because they acted as though you were unimportant, you must be unimportant. Because they treated you casually, you must be casual. Because they failed to honor you, you must be dishonorable. That is how people hand strangers, critics, unstable partners, and emotionally immature individuals the power to shape their self-image. And once that happens, a painful cycle begins. You do not just suffer the initial disrespect, you begin performing around it. You try harder to prove your worth. You become more eager for reassurance. You chase what ignored you. You over-explain yourself to people who already chose not to understand you. You seek validation from the very source that destabilized you. This is one of the cruelest traps in emotional life. You think you are trying to heal the wound, but you are actually deepening the dependence. You are asking the person who shook your worth to become the one who restores it. The Stoics would call this slavery of the worst kind, because now your value feels real only when confirmed from outside. Seneca cuts through this illusion with remarkable force. In Letters from a Stoic by Seneca, he reminds us that the crowd's judgments are unstable and often corrupted by impulse, envy, ignorance, and fashion. If that is true of crowds, it is certainly true of individuals. Why then would you let the behavior of every passing person become a mirror for your value? Why would you let someone's emotional immaturity become your personal measurement? Why would you treat the reactions of confused people as sacred data? A Stoic does not do that. A Stoic examines, filters, and refuses. Not every opinion deserves admission. Not every behavior deserves interpretation. Not every rejection deserves reverence. There is also a hidden arrogance in taking every negative action personally. Sometimes people are not thinking deeply about you at all. Sometimes they are acting from fatigue, habit, selfishness, poor character, emotional instability, or private conflict. Sometimes they are simply limited, but the ego, especially a wounded ego, tends to pull everything inward. It says, "This happened because of me. This tone means something about me. This distance must reflect my value." In many cases, that is not wisdom. It is self-centered suffering. The Stoic steps out of that trap by recognizing that human beings often act badly for reasons that originate within themselves. You may be affected by it, yes, but you are not automatically defined by it. This becomes even more important in close relationships, because that is where people are most tempted to confuse treatment with worth. If someone you love withdraws, lies, disrespects, or neglects you, the pain cuts deeper because their behavior seems to come from a place that mattered. But even there, the principle remains. Their behavior may reveal that the relationship is unhealthy. It may reveal that boundaries are needed. It may reveal that trust has been broken, but it still does not become a final statement on your value as a human being. That is a line you must learn to protect. Because the moment you let poor treatment define your worth, you become vulnerable not only to pain, but to repetition. You start accepting less because you secretly believe you deserve less. The Stoics demand something nobler. They ask you to build your estimate of yourself on your character, your choices, your discipline, and your alignment with virtue, not on whether others clap, stay, approve, understand, or behave well. That does not mean you become arrogant. It means you become anchored. You know that another person can disappoint you without diminishing you. They can reject you without reducing you. They can fail to appreciate you without exposing some hidden emptiness in you. Their behavior may require a response. It may require distance. It may require discernment. But it does not get to become your identity. This is where emotional strength begins to feel real. You stop chasing respect from people who are incapable of giving it cleanly. You stop collapsing every time someone fails to see your value. You stop measuring yourself by unstable hands. You learn to say, their behavior is information, but it is not definition. It tells me something about the situation, perhaps something about them, and maybe even something I need to examine in myself, but it does not become the judge of my worth. That is a powerful shift. It gives you room to reflect without self-betrayal. It lets you learn without shrinking. It lets you face hard experiences without handing them your name. And once you understand this, another layer of mastery opens up. Because even when people do affect you, and even when their behavior is painful, there is still one place where your power remains untouched. It lives in the small, decisive gap between what strikes you and how you choose to respond. That is where the next rule begins. Master the space between trigger and reaction. Most people think emotional weakness begins when they feel something intensely. The Stoics would disagree. Feeling is not the problem. The real danger begins when feeling instantly becomes action, when the trigger enters and the reaction follows so quickly that there is no room for judgment, no room for discipline, no room for freedom. That is where people lose themselves. A word is spoken, and they answer from anger. A message arrives, and they respond from panic. Someone provokes them, and their whole inner state rushes forward before reason has even entered the room. In that moment, they are not choosing. They are being moved. And a person who is easily moved is a person who is easily controlled. This is why the space between trigger and reaction is one of the most valuable territories in human life. It is small, often invisible, sometimes only a few seconds long, but everything changes there. Your dignity is protected there. Your clarity is protected there. Your peace is protected there. If you do not learn how to live in that space, then every external event gains direct access to your behavior. Other people do not even need much power over you. They only need to know what activates you. Once they find the right tone, the right silence, the right insult, the right form of withdrawal, they can predict your movement. They can summon your anger, your anxiety, your need to explain, your need to defend, your need to chase. At that point, your emotions are no longer just being felt, they are being used. Epictetus built much of his philosophy on this exact point. In the discourses of Epictetus, he insists that impressions arrive, but assent is ours. That is a profound distinction. The first impact may not be chosen. You may feel the sting. You may feel the surge of irritation, the flash of shame, the pull of fear. But what happens next is where your character enters. Do you agree with the impression immediately, or do you examine it? Do you obey the first emotional command, or do you pause long enough to ask whether it deserves obedience? The undisciplined mind treats every inner movement like an order. The Stoic mind treats it like a report, important perhaps, worth noticing certainly, but not automatically true and never automatically in charge. Think about how many mistakes are made in the first few seconds after an emotional trigger. A person feels disrespected, so they answer sharply and create a conflict that did not need to become a war. A person feels ignored, so they send another message from insecurity and make their dependence visible. A person feels criticized, so they become defensive before even considering whether the criticism contains anything useful. A person feels rejected, so they react with coldness, distance, anger, or self-humiliation, all because they could not bear the discomfort of pausing. These are not only emotional mistakes, they are failures of timing, failures of internal spacing, failures to create one clear breath between what happened and what you do next. Marcus Aurelius understood this with extraordinary precision. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 5, paragraph 11, he reminds himself that the mind does not have to be dragged by every impression. That is the challenge. Not to stop impressions from arriving, because they will arrive. Not to become numb, because that is not wisdom. The challenge is to refuse immediate captivity, to feel without rushing, to notice without surrendering, to let the first wave pass before you decide what the sea actually means. That is where real strength begins. Not in dramatic speeches about self-control, but in quiet moments where a person chooses not to become the first emotion that touches them. This pause is difficult because emotional triggers create urgency. They whisper that action must happen now, answer now, defend now, explain now. Punish now, fix now, chase now, withdraw now. The nervous system wants movement because movement feels like relief, but that relief is often deceptive. It is the relief of discharge, not the relief of mastery. You feel better for a moment because you acted, but you acted under command, not under clarity. The Stoic trains to recognize this false urgency. Just because a feeling is intense does not mean it is wise. Just because the impulse is strong does not mean it is right. Just because you want to react now does not mean now is the time to move. Seneca was especially sharp on anger because he saw how quickly it turns a human being into a weapon against himself. In On Anger by Seneca, he describes anger as a temporary madness. That phrase matters far beyond anger alone. Panic can function like temporary madness. Hurt pride can function like temporary madness. Fear of abandonment can function like temporary madness. In each case, the mind stops observing and starts obeying. The Stoic response is not repression, it is interruption. It is the deliberate insertion of consciousness where instinct was about to take over. It is the refusal to let the first emotional spark become a fire before reason has had a chance to speak. This is why mastering the space between trigger and reaction is not passive. It is active, inner labor. It may look like silence on the outside, but inside it is a disciplined act of leadership. You are holding the line. You are preventing one moment from recruiting your whole identity. You are saying, I feel this, but I will not become this. I notice the urge, but I will not kneel to it. I see the invitation to react, but I do not have to accept it. That kind of pause is not weakness, it is command. It is what separates a person who belongs to himself from a person who belongs to whatever disturbs him first. And there is something else hidden in that space. Information. When you do not react immediately, you start seeing more clearly. You notice whether the other person is trying to provoke you. You notice whether your pain comes from the present moment or from some older wound it touched. You notice whether your impulse is about justice, ego, fear, insecurity, or control. You notice whether the situation actually deserves a response or whether it only deserves distance. Without the pause, all of that is lost. Reaction destroys observation. It turns every event into a command instead of a lesson. But when you wait, even briefly, your mind becomes a better witness, and a better witness becomes a better ruler. This skill also protects your future. So much suffering comes from what people do under emotional momentum. They send the message they later regret. They say the sentence that cannot be taken back. They reveal the insecurity they wish they had concealed. They make decisions from wounded pride, and then spend weeks cleaning up the consequences. The trigger lasted seconds. The reaction created months of damage. This is why the Stoics place such value on self-command. Not because control is glamorous, but because one ungoverned moment can distort an entire season of life. A person who has mastered this space becomes difficult to manipulate. Insults lose some of their leverage. Silence loses some of its power. Guilt loses some of its speed. Emotional games lose their efficiency because the expected reaction does not arrive on schedule, and this changes the social dynamic completely. Many people keep pushing because they have learned that you can be moved. They have learned where your buttons are and how quickly your nervous system obeys them. But when you begin to pause, the chain is broken. The trigger may still come, but the automatic reaction does not. That is when the other person stops dealing with your reflex and starts meeting your will. This does not mean every response should be slow or that every situation requires long reflection. It means your response should belong to you. Even if it is immediate, it should come from judgment, not compulsion. It should come from choice, not emotional kidnapping. The Stoic is not delayed by life. He is not frozen by caution. He is simply unwilling to let the outside world dictate the timing and tone of his inner movements. That is why even a brief pause can become revolutionary. One breath, one moment of silence, one question asked internally before words leave your mouth. Is this true? Is this necessary? Is this worthy of me? That small interval can save relationships, protect dignity, preserve peace, and prevent pain from multiplying. Once you begin practicing this, you start discovering a new kind of power. You realize that not every feeling deserves expression. Not every provocation deserves engagement. Not every discomfort requires immediate relief. You learn that strength is not found in how quickly you can respond, but in how deeply you can remain yourself while pressure is being applied. That is the essence of inner freedom. Not that nothing touches you, but that what touches you does not instantly command you. And that leads directly into the next rule, because even when you learn to pause, there is another trap waiting underneath. Many people still suffer because they keep expecting every person to be fair, mature, reasonable, and emotionally honest. The Stoics would warn you that this expectation alone can become a source of endless pain. Stop needing emotional justice from everyone. One of the deepest reasons people stay emotionally vulnerable is that they keep expecting the world to behave in a way that would make peace easy. They want people to be fair, clear, mature, honest, and emotionally responsible. They want the rude person to suddenly become respectful. They want the manipulative person to become clean-hearted. They want the selfish person to become considerate. They want the unstable person to become predictable. And when that does not happen, they suffer twice. First because of what the other person did, and then because reality refused to match the moral standard they were secretly demanding from it. This is where a great deal of unnecessary pain is born. Not only from human imperfection itself, but from the insistence that inner peace should depend on other people becoming better. The Stoics would tell you that this expectation is dangerous because it disguises itself as righteousness. It feels noble to want fairness, it feels reasonable to want consistency, it feels justified to want people to act with decency. And in a moral sense, those desires are not wrong. But emotionally, the trap begins when your peace starts depending on them. The moment you tell yourself that you can only remain calm if others are balanced, honest, kind, or self-aware, you have placed your inner state in unstable hands. You have made peace conditional on a world that has never promised emotional justice on demand. That is why so many people live in quiet resentment. They are not only hurt by bad behavior, they are exhausted by reality's refusal to behave according to the script they wrote in their minds. Epictetus was mercilessly clear about this. In the Enchiridion of Epictetus, he teaches that when you want events to happen as they do happen, rather than insisting they happen as you wish, life becomes more bearable and the mind becomes more free. That principle is not passive. It is not surrender to evil. It is recognition of reality. Human beings are inconsistent. Many are ruled by ego. Many act from fear. Many are driven by vanity, insecurity, immaturity, resentment, appetite, or confusion. If you enter life expecting otherwise, you will remain shocked by things that should have been anticipated. And what shocks you repeatedly will continue to control you. Marcus Aurelius prepared himself for this exact reason. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 2, Paragraph 1, he tells himself at the start of the day that he will meet people who are meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, deceitful, envious, and antisocial. He does not say this to become cynical. He says it so that he will not be emotionally ambushed by ordinary human weakness. There is immense power in that. When you stop expecting universal fairness, you stop collapsing every time unfairness appears. When you stop demanding emotional maturity from everyone, you stop being devastated whenever immaturity speaks. You begin to meet people as they are, not as your peace requires them to be. This changes the whole way you move through difficult relationships. Instead of saying, "How could they do this?" you begin asking, given who they are, "Why am I surprised that they did?" That question is not cold, it is clarifying. It protects you from the repeated injury of unrealistic hope. Many people do not suffer only because someone lied, disrespected them, manipulated them, or withdrew affection. They suffer because part of them still believed that person would choose higher conduct. They gave that person a moral level they had not earned, then felt betrayed when reality revealed the truth. The Stoic learns to remove illusion before it becomes pain. He stops demanding fruit from barren trees. There is also a subtle kind of emotional arrogance hidden in this need for justice from everyone. It is the belief that because something should be a certain way, it therefore will be. But the world does not organize itself around what should happen. People do not become wise because wisdom would make your life easier. They do not become clear because clarity would comfort you. They do not become honest because honesty would save the relationship. They act according to their character, their habits, their wounds, and their level of discipline. To demand that they behave above their condition, simply because you would prefer it, is to fight reality itself. And fighting reality is one of the fastest ways to lose peace. Seneca understood this deeply. In Letters from a Stoic by Seneca, he repeatedly warns against building emotional stability on fragile expectations. The problem with expecting justice from everyone is not that justice is unimportant. The problem is that expectation creates dependence. It creates a hidden contract in your mind. I will remain okay if people behave as they should, but they often will not. So your calm begins to rise and fall with every moral failure around you. One betrayal ruins your week. One act of hypocrisy poisons your thoughts. One selfish decision keeps replaying in your mind because you cannot stop arguing with reality. You are not only dealing with the event, you are trying to force the event to become something else after it has already happened. The Stoic path offers a harsher but freer alternative. It says, let people reveal themselves. Let the dishonest person show dishonesty. Let the immature person show immaturity. Let the manipulative person reveal manipulation. Let the selfish person expose selfishness. And once they do, stop asking the universe to rewrite them so you can feel safe. See clearly, judge wisely, respond accordingly. But do not give your peace the impossible job of waiting for every soul to become just. That is too heavy a burden for the heart to carry. This does not mean you tolerate abuse. It does not mean you lower your standards. It does not mean you become indifferent to character. Quite the opposite. You can hold strong standards while releasing emotional dependence on universal fairness. You can say, this behavior is unacceptable, and still refuse to become inwardly shattered by it. You can create boundaries without creating bitterness. You can see what is wrong without needing the wrongdoer to become right before you can breathe again. That is a more mature kind of strength. It does not beg reality to change before stability can begin. A large part of emotional suffering comes from invisible demands. You should have understood me. You should have treated me better. You should have been more honest. You should have been more loyal. You should have been more careful with what I trusted you with. Sometimes those statements are true in a moral sense, but emotionally, if you keep repeating them inside yourself, they become chains. They keep you tied to an alternate version of reality that does not exist. They keep you emotionally negotiating with what has already shown itself. And the longer you stay in that negotiation, the longer the other person's failure continues occupying your mind. The Stoic does something different. He grieves what is real, but he does not romanticize what should have been. He accepts the lesson faster than most people accept the disappointment. He understands that peace becomes possible the moment he stops waiting for emotional justice from every corner of life. Some people will remain unfair. Some will remain unhealed. Some will remain driven by pride, appetite, fear, and vanity. Their condition is unfortunate, but it does not need to become your prison. The more quickly you accept this, the more quickly your energy returns to where it belongs, to your judgment, your conduct, your standards, your direction. There is a deep freedom in no longer demanding that life be staffed entirely by mature people before you can remain centered. You stop being shocked by common human weakness. You stop losing days to disappointment that could have become discernment. You stop asking broken people to handle your heart as if they were whole. And because of that, your peace stops depending on impossible conditions. It becomes more durable, more realistic, more self-governed. This rule matters because it cuts one of the hidden roots of emotional control. As long as you need everyone to be fair before you can remain calm, you will always be vulnerable to those who are not. But once you release that need, something stronger begins to form. You become less naive, but not colder. Less dependent, but not closed. Less easily wounded by other people's defects, because you no longer mistake their defects for a personal assault on your right to peace. And once that shift begins, another truth becomes impossible to ignore. It is not only unfair people who can disturb you. Very often the greatest damage comes when you place your inner stability in the hands of people who are unstable themselves. That is where the next rule begins. Never hand your peace to unstable minds. One of the most painful mistakes a person can make is to build emotional dependence on someone who cannot even govern himself. This is where many people lose years of peace without understanding why. They keep trying to find stability through a person who changes with every mood, every insecurity, every impulse, every wound, every frustration, every passing emotion. One day that person is warm, the next day distant. One moment they are kind, the next moment cold. One week they seem sincere, the next week confusing. And because their inconsistency keeps producing emotional whiplash, you begin living in a state of constant internal adjustment. You study their tone, you monitor their silence, you interpret their distance, you brace for shifts you cannot predict. At that point, your peace is no longer rooted in judgment. It is hanging from the moods of someone who cannot hold his own center. This is why the Stoic would see emotional dependence on unstable minds as a direct threat to freedom. You cannot create a calm life while constantly attaching your nervous system to people whose inner world is disordered. Their confusion becomes contagious. Their lack of discipline starts shaping your emotional rhythm. Their storms teach your mind to become watchful, tense, hyper-aware, and exhausted. You begin to organize yourself around someone else's instability, hoping that if you say the right thing, wait the right amount of time, explain yourself clearly enough, stay patient enough, forgive enough, prove enough, then perhaps they will finally become steady. But this hope often becomes its own trap, because while you are waiting for them to become emotionally reliable, your own peace is deteriorating. Epictetus would force you to face the hard truth here. If you place your peace in what is not under your control, you have chosen a life of vulnerability. The moods of an unstable person are not under your control. Their emotional swings are not under your control. Their inconsistency, avoidance, manipulation, confusion, volatility, and self-contradiction are not under your control. And yet many people hand all of their peace to exactly these things. They wake up and feel better only if that person sounds normal. They sleep badly because of a shift in tone. They lose focus because of a delayed reply. They replay conversations because the other person's behavior has become the main source of emotional weather in their life. This is not love. This is captivity, disguised as attachment. What makes this trap even more dangerous is that unstable people often create the strongest emotional hooks. Their unpredictability intensifies your attention. Their inconsistency makes every moment of warmth feel more valuable. Their withdrawal makes you chase. Their approval feels like relief, not because it is pure, but because it interrupts tension. You do not even realize that the bond is becoming chemically and psychologically conditioned by uncertainty. The mind starts craving peace from the same source that keeps disturbing it. The person causing the instability also becomes the person you hope will remove it. That is one of the oldest and cruelest cycles in emotional life. Seneca would call this a failure of inner government. In Letters from a Stoic by Seneca, he repeatedly points back to the need for a mind that is not tossed around by external conditions. But if you keep tying yourself to unstable souls, your mind will be tossed around constantly. Their fear becomes your fear. Their indecision becomes your tension. Their immaturity becomes your emotional labor. Their inability to communicate becomes your endless mental noise. You begin carrying burdens that were never yours, managing emotional climates you did not create, trying to stabilize situations that cannot be stabilized from your side alone. That is where exhaustion becomes chronic. You are not simply living. You are perpetually recovering from another person's lack of order. Marcus Aurelius understood that one of the highest forms of strength is to remain governed from within, even when the world around you is disordered. But many people unknowingly reverse this principle. They build their internal stability around people who are internally unstable. Then they wonder why they feel anxious, restless, reactive, confused, and depleted. The answer is painful, but simple. You cannot drink peace from a poisoned well. You cannot make emotional safety out of a mind that keeps betraying itself. You cannot rest inside the chaos of someone who has not learned how to rest within himself. This does not mean unstable people are evil. Some are deeply wounded, some are immature, some are living without discipline, some have never learned emotional responsibility, some are ruled by fear, pride, insecurity, impulsiveness, or private pain. The Stoic does not deny that reality. He sees it clearly. He may even feel compassion for it, but compassion is not the same as surrender. Understanding someone's instability does not mean offering your peace as a sacrifice to it. You can understand their struggle without making their struggle your home. You can recognize their pain without letting their pain author your nervous system. And this is where many people get confused. They think endurance is love. They think constant accommodation is loyalty. They think if they remain patient enough with instability, it will eventually transform into security. Sometimes patience is noble, sometimes endurance is required. But when patience becomes self-erasure, it is no longer virtue. When endurance becomes a lifestyle of emotional disorientation, it is no longer strength. It is self-abandonment. The Stoics would never praise the kind of attachment that demands you lose yourself in order to maintain connection. That is not wisdom. It is dependence wearing the mask of devotion. A stable mind does not hand over its center to unpredictable hands. It observes, it discerns, it adjusts its level of trust according to reality, not according to hope alone. This is one of the most difficult lessons because people often want to be loved by those who are least able to love cleanly. They want consistency from the inconsistent, clarity from the confused, maturity from the undisciplined, and peace from the restless. But desire does not transform capacity. Your need does not create their readiness. Your loyalty does not automatically produce their self-command. If they are unstable, then the wise response is not deeper emotional dependence. The wise response is deeper discernment. This is why boundaries are not a cold act in Stoicism. They are an intelligent act. A boundary says, I see what you are and I will not pretend otherwise for the sake of comfort. It says, I may care, but I will not let your internal disorder become the ruler of my internal state. It says, I refuse to organize my peace around someone who cannot carry peace consistently. That kind of firmness is not cruel. It is clean. It protects what is sacred. It keeps compassion from turning into self-destruction. There is also a powerful emotional shift that happens when you stop handing your peace to unstable minds. You stop living in anticipation of someone else's next mood. You stop measuring your safety by their next message, their next reaction, their next phase of warmth or withdrawal. You stop making yourself responsible for emotional weather that was already broken before you arrived. And in that freedom, your mind begins to breathe differently. It becomes less watchful, less strained, less desperate for signs that everything is okay. You start returning to yourself. The Stoic path does not ask you to become unfeeling. It asks you to become unenslaved. It asks you to stop confusing attachment with surrender, compassion with self-neglect, and hope with sound judgment. It asks you to recognize that peace cannot survive where discernment has been abandoned. If someone is unstable, then your task is not to anchor yourself inside their instability. Your task is to remain so rooted in your own judgment that their disorder does not become your identity, your atmosphere, or your ruler. This rule matters because many people think they are being controlled by obviously cruel people, when in reality, they are being drained by unstable people. The damage is quieter, but often deeper. Not direct domination, but constant destabilization. Not one sharp wound, but 1,000 subtle disruptions that train the mind into anxiety and dependence. Once you see that pattern, you begin to understand why protecting your peace is not selfish. It is necessary. It is the only way to keep your mind from being slowly shaped by chaos that never belonged to you. And once you begin refusing that chaos, another layer of mastery appears. Because not all disrespect comes as honest conflict. Much of it is performed, staged, exaggerated, and designed to provoke a reaction. If you do not recognize that performance, you will keep stepping onto a stage that was built to make you lose yourself. That is where the next rule begins. Learn to be unmoved by performative disrespect. Not all disrespect is real in the deepest sense. A great deal of it is performance. It is not the honest expression of conviction, strength, or truth. It is theater. It is a display meant to provoke, unsettle, humiliate, dominate, or pull you into emotional movement. Some people do not disrespect you because you matter that much to them. They disrespect you because they need an effect. They need to feel power, They need to prove something. They need to create disorder and then watch whether you become part of it. This is why so many people lose emotional control in situations that were carefully designed to take it from them. They mistake performance for substance, provocation for authority, and noise for importance. The Stoic sees this differently. He understands that many acts of disrespect are less about truth and more about appetite. Appetite for attention, appetite for superiority, appetite for reaction, appetite for control. A raised tone, a dismissive look, a sarcastic remark, a calculated silence, a public slight, a mocking gesture, an unnecessary contradiction, all of these can be forms of performative disrespect. The goal is often not communication. The goal is impact. The person wants to enter your nervous system. They want to change your breathing, your posture, your thoughts, your timing. They want you off your center. And if you do not recognize the performance, you will respond to the show as if it were reality itself. This is where emotional slavery becomes almost mechanical. Someone gives you disrespect with enough force or style, and your system instantly treats it as a command to react. Anger rises, pride hardens. The need to answer becomes urgent. The need to defend yourself feels righteous. The need to prove that you are not weak starts moving through your chest like fire. But that is exactly what the performance was meant to produce. The disrespect was not only aimed at your image, it was aimed at your self-command. The true objective was not to insult you, it was to recruit you into emotional reaction. Once that happens, they have succeeded twice. First, by disturbing your peace, and second, by making you participate in the ugliness they introduced. Epictetus would push you to ask one question above all others. What exactly has happened inside me that I am so ready to obey this person's behavior? Because that is the real issue. The disrespect may be theirs, but the obedience becomes yours. In the discourses of Epictetus, he teaches that external events do not rule us unless we grant them entrance through judgment. Performative disrespect depends on that entrance. It depends on your ego interpreting the display as something that must be met immediately. It depends on your pride whispering that silence equals weakness. It depends on your insecurity fearing that if you do not answer now, you will lose status, dignity, or control. The Stoic cuts through that chain. He sees the attempt and refuses the assignment. Marcus Aurelius understood that one of the greatest strengths of a disciplined mind is its refusal to become like what disturbs it. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 6, Paragraph 6, he reminds himself that the best revenge is not to become like the wrongdoer. That is especially important here. Performative disrespect often tries to drag you downward, not merely to hurt you, but to reshape you. It invites you into the same pettiness, the same agitation, the same theatrical need for dominance. If you accept the invitation, then even if you win the exchange on the surface, you lose something far more important underneath. You lose composure. You lose proportion. You lose the distance that allows wisdom to remain in charge. Many people confuse immediate retaliation with strength. The Stoics would not. They knew that a person who must react every time he is provoked is not powerful. He is programmable. He is externally operated. He may look fierce, but he is still moving on command. True strength is revealed when a person sees the bait, feels the pull, understands the social pressure to answer, and still chooses his response from a place deeper than wounded pride. That response may be silence. It may be a calm sentence. It may be a boundary, it may be strategic distance, it may be direct correction without emotional leakage. But whatever it is, it belongs to him. It does not belong to the performance. This matters because performative disrespect is often rewarded in modern life. People admire spectacle. They confuse boldness with depth, aggression with conviction, mockery with intelligence, emotional display with power. That makes it even more dangerous because you may feel not only the internal urge to react, but also the social pressure to prove yourself in front of others. Suddenly, the disrespect is no longer private. It becomes a test of image, and image is where many people fall. They would rather lose their peace than look passive. They would rather injure themselves emotionally than appear as though they tolerated something. The Stoic is not trapped by that fear. He knows that looking strong and being strong are not the same thing. A man who keeps command of himself in the face of disrespect possesses something no crowd can grant and no mocker can take away. Seneca understood how easily the mind is captured by insult when pride is left unguarded. In On Anger by Seneca, he keeps returning to the need for a slower, more deliberate relation to offense, not because insults are harmless, but because our first interpretation of them is often inflated by vanity. We imagine that every disrespect demands a trial, a verdict, a response, a correction, a restoration of honor. But many slights are not worthy of that investment. Some are beneath engagement. Some expose the other person more clearly if left unanswered. Some lose their force the moment they fail to produce emotional movement in you. A person expecting your reaction is often most defeated by your refusal to perform in return. This does not mean you become passive or allow yourself to be mistreated endlessly. The Stoic does not confuse calm with submission. There are times to confront, times to leave, times to speak plainly, times to protect boundaries, and times to refuse access altogether. But even then, the goal is not to answer from the injury itself. The goal is to act from reason, to respond with precision rather than emotional spillage, to remain so inwardly anchored that even your firmness is clean. That kind of response unsettles shallow people because it gives them no chaos to feed on. It denies them the spectacle they were hoping to create. There is also a deeper liberation hidden here. Once you learn to see performative disrespect as theater rather than revelation, much of its magic disappears. The cutting remark loses some of its sharpness. The dismissive tone loses some of its mystery. The exaggerated posture loses some of its authority. You begin to see that many people are not standing on real power at all. They are standing on display. They need emotional effects to feel substantial. They need reactions to feel visible. They need to move others because they cannot hold themselves. And once you see that clearly, you stop giving every display the dignity of a wound. A disciplined mind asks different questions. Is this disrespect actually important, or is it simply loud? Is this person speaking from truth or performing from insecurity? Does this deserve my energy, or is my reaction the very prize they were seeking? These questions are not evasions. They are forms of self-protection. They keep you from stepping into roles that were written for your downfall. They allow you to remain difficult to provoke, difficult to embarrass, difficult to drag into public or private foolishness. That is not emotional coldness. It is strategic clarity. And strategic clarity changes the whole texture of life. You stop being available for every low invitation. You stop lending your nervous system to people who live on provocation. You stop assuming that every disrespect must be answered in the language in which it was delivered. You start seeing that one of the highest forms of dignity is the refusal to abandon yourself, simply because someone else abandoned restraint. Your peace becomes less theatrical, less fragile, less dependent on constant demonstrations of strength. It becomes internal, measured, and hard to steal. This rule matters because many people are not defeated by real opposition. They are defeated by bait. They lose themselves not in genuine conflict, but in performances built to expose their impatience, pride, insecurity, and need for dominance. Once you stop falling for that performance, you become far less controllable. You begin to move with a different type of power, one that is not easily seen from the outside, but is unmistakable to anyone who tries to disturb you. And that brings you to another danger. Because even when you stop reacting to people's chaos, there is still a risk that their confusion, their disorder, and their emotional darkness will begin shaping the way you see yourself. That is where the next rule begins. Refuse to make their chaos your identity. One of the most subtle forms of emotional defeat happens when another person's confusion stops being something you experience and starts becoming something you carry as a definition of yourself. This is how difficult relationships leave a deeper stain than a single argument or a single wound. At first, someone brings chaos into your life through inconsistency, manipulation, criticism, instability, coldness, or emotional games. You recognize it as something coming from them, but if the pattern goes on long enough, and if your inner boundaries are weak, their chaos begins to change the way you see your own reflection. You become less certain of who you are. You become more suspicious of your value. You become more reactive, more doubtful, more ashamed, more defensive. Without realizing it, you stop saying, "This situation is chaotic," and start feeling, "Maybe I am the problem." That is the moment their disorder begins to live inside your identity. The Stoics would treat this as a grave mistake, because identity is one of the last places that must remain under self-government. Other people may affect your environment. They may complicate your circumstances. They may even wound you deeply, but they do not gain the right to become your mirror. The instant you start using someone else's dysfunction as evidence about your essence, you surrender something sacred. You let external disorder become internal definition, and once that happens, the damage multiplies. A cruel person does not just hurt you once. He begins to reshape the way you interpret yourself. A manipulative person does not just confuse you in the moment. He trains you to distrust your own clarity. An unstable person does not simply disturb your peace. He leaves you wondering whether your need for stability is weakness. This is how chaos travels from relationship into identity. Epictetus would remind you that the deepest freedom lies in guarding your faculty of judgment. In the discourses of Epictetus, he insists that no one can truly harm the ruling center unless it consents to false judgments. That matters here because another person's confusion only becomes your identity when you begin agreeing with conclusions that were never worthy of assent. Their treatment says you are not enough. Their withdrawal says you are hard to love. Their criticism says you are the issue. Their instability says you are always one mistake away from losing connection. Their manipulation says your role is to doubt yourself and work harder for peace. These are not truths, they are pressures. But if you internalize them long enough, they stop feeling like pressures and start feeling like facts. This is why so many people leave chaotic relationships carrying more than memory. They carry contamination. Their nervous system is altered. Their self-concept is bruised. Their confidence is fractured. They hesitate more. They apologize more. They over-explain more. Marcus Aurelius offers a crucial antidote to this in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, where he repeatedly returns to the need to keep the soul from taking the color of its surroundings. That teaching goes far beyond mood. It reaches identity itself. If you spend enough time near anger, deceit, instability, resentment, or emotional confusion, there is a real danger that you begin organizing yourself around those forces, not by becoming identical to them, but by becoming defined in relation to them. You become the fixer, the appeaser, the overthinker, the one who carries the emotional burden, the one who questions himself first, the one who tries harder, the one who waits longer, the one who absorbs more. Slowly, your original self begins to disappear behind the posture you adopted to survive someone else's chaos. The Stoic refuses that transformation. He may be wounded, yes. He may be disappointed, yes. He may have to face painful truths about people, attachment, trust, and loss. But he does not let those experiences rewrite the core of who he is. He does not confuse exposure to dysfunction with proof of personal defect. He does not build his identity around what he had to endure. This is important because pain has a way of offering false identities. It says, now you are the rejected one. Now you are the difficult one. Now you are the needy one. Now you are the broken one. Now you are the person who cannot trust himself. If you are not careful, suffering will not only ask you to feel it, it will ask you to become it. Seneca understood that adversity tests a person, but it does not automatically define him. In Letters from a Stoic by Seneca, there is a constant return to the idea that the wise man must remain anchored in character rather than in circumstance. Character is built from judgment, conduct, and virtue. Circumstance includes the people who fail you, distort your peace, and bring confusion into your life. If you let circumstance define character, then every difficult person gains too much power. Every betrayal becomes a biography. Every manipulation becomes a label. Every season of emotional turbulence becomes a new self-image. The Stoic says no. What happened may matter. What happened may hurt. What happened may demand healing. But what happened does not own the right to name you. This becomes even more urgent Because chaos often produces guilt. A person who lives around instability begins to feel responsible for stabilizing what was never his task to stabilize. When that fails, he feels inadequate. He thinks, maybe I did not communicate well enough. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I should have been more patient. Maybe I am the one making things hard. This is how disordered environments train healthy instincts into self-accusation. Your desire for consistency becomes labeled as neediness. Your request for honesty becomes labeled as pressure. Your pain becomes labeled as overreaction. Eventually, you do not just live around chaos, you start defending it against yourself. That is when identity has been deeply compromised. The Stoic breaks this pattern by returning to first principles. What is mine? What is not mine? What belongs to my character? What belongs to another person's character? What I need to correct in myself? What I must refuse to carry for others? This kind of inner sorting is essential because not every emotional burden that lands on you is meant to stay with you. Some feelings are signals, not identities. Some wounds are events, not definitions. Some painful patterns are revealing what must be left behind, not who you are. The more clearly you separate your essence from their chaos, the more quickly you stop building a false self around a painful experience. And there is great dignity in that refusal. You can say, this relationship confused me, but confusion is not my identity. This person made me doubt myself, but doubt is not my nature. This season exhausted me, but exhaustion is not my name. Their inconsistency destabilized me for a time, but instability does not get to become my story. That is not denial, it is reclamation. It is the disciplined act of pulling your identity back from places where it was stretched, distorted, and misread. The world will always try to name you through its reactions. The Stoic insists on being named by character instead. Once you begin doing this, healing takes on a different shape. It is no longer just about feeling better. It becomes about becoming accurate again. Accurate about who you are. Accurate about what happened. Accurate about what belongs to you and what never did. That accuracy is liberating because it removes shame from places where only discernment was needed. It stops the quiet self-betrayal that happens when you keep carrying labels born inside someone else's brokenness. And with that clarity, you become harder to control because people can no longer shape your identity simply by surrounding you with enough confusion. This rule matters because many people think they are only trying to recover their peace, when in truth, they are also trying to recover their self-definition. They are trying to remember who they were before another person's chaos became a private language inside their head. The Stoic path does not just help you calm down, it helps you return to yourself without carrying every distortion you met along the way. And once you begin refusing false identities, you start seeing another battlefield more clearly. It is not only your feelings or your self-image that others try to influence. Very often, the first thing they capture is your attention. And once your attention is captured, the rest of you becomes easier to move. That is where the next rule begins. Guard your attention. Like a Stoic fortress, before people control your emotions, they usually capture your attention. That is where the invasion begins. Not in the heart at first, not even in the reaction, but in the gaze of the mind. What are you watching? What are you replaying? What are you waiting for? What are you checking again and again? Whose tone are you analyzing? Whose silence are you trying to decode? Whose approval are you monitoring? Attention is the doorway through which emotional control enters. Once someone occupies enough of your mental space, they do not need to be physically present to disturb you. They can live inside your day without saying a word. A look, a delay, a memory, a social signal, a possibility, and suddenly your focus is no longer yours. It is orbiting around them. This is why the Stoics would never treat attention as something casual. Attention is not just concentration, it is allegiance. It is placement of life force. Whatever your mind keeps returning to starts shaping your mood, your interpretation of reality, your energy, your choices, and your sense of self. If your attention is constantly captured by unstable people, by emotional games, by disrespect, by imagined conversations, by the fear of being misunderstood, then your mind is no longer living under deliberate rule. It is being occupied, and occupation always comes with a price. The longer someone controls what you mentally rehearse, the more influence they gain over how you feel. Epictetus understood this with tremendous seriousness. In the discourses of Epictetus, there is a constant insistence that the disciplined person must watch the movements of the mind with care. Not every impression deserves prolonged residence. Not every event deserves to become a private obsession. Not every signal deserves a throne in consciousness. This matters because attention is not neutral. The mind deepens whatever it revisits. A single cold message may last seconds in the outside world, but if your attention circles it for hours, it becomes a climate. A brief slight may disappear in reality, but if your attention keeps feeding it, it expands into identity, resentment, anxiety, or self-doubt. What you repeatedly attend to grows roots. That is why emotionally controlling people often do not need enormous force. They only need repeated access to your attention. A little inconsistency, a little unpredictability, a little withdrawal, a little tension, a little praise, then silence. They create just enough movement to keep your mind returning. And once your attention is hooked, the rest becomes easier. You begin to anticipate, interpret, monitor, and project. You stop being present in your own life. Your meals, your work, your rest, your conversations, your solitude, all of it becomes partially occupied by someone else's emotional shadow. The outside event may be small, but the inner repetition makes it enormous. Marcus Aurelius knew that the mind must be defended from this kind of drift. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 8, paragraph 36, he points back to the need to keep returning the ruling faculty to itself. That phrase matters, returning the ruling faculty to itself, because the mind is always at risk of being pulled outward into noise, provocation, fantasy, fear, and emotional entanglement. A Stoic fortress is not built from walls against life. It is built from disciplined returns. Return to the present. Return to judgment. Return to what is in your control. Return to what deserves your thought. Return to your task. Return to your values. Return to yourself. Most people underestimate how much suffering comes not from events, but from mental overexposure. They think they are wounded by what happened once, when in reality they are being worn down by how often they mentally revisit it. They are not living in one insult. They are living in 50 replays of it. They are not suffering from one moment of distance. They are suffering from 1,000 interpretations of that distance. Attention magnifies. Attention repeats. Attention keeps emotional wounds open long after the original contact has ended. This is why guarding attention is not a small discipline. It is one of the central acts of self-protection. Seneca would likely tell you that the mind becomes the shape of what it repeatedly entertains. In Letters from a Stoic by Seneca, he warns again and again against mental habits that weaken stability and feed agitation. A scattered mind cannot remain free. A mind that belongs to every interruption cannot belong fully to itself. If your peace depends on constantly checking, anticipating, decoding, or rehearsing someone else's behavior, then you have already handed over too much ground. Your emotional dependence may look like concern, curiosity, or care, but underneath it is still dependence. The proof is simple. If their actions govern your attention, their influence over your emotions is already underway. This is especially dangerous in the modern world, where attention is easier to capture and harder to recover. A person no longer needs to stand in front of you to disturb you. A status update, a delayed response, a read receipt, an absence, a post, a story, a small shift in online behavior, all of it can become material for mental occupation. The nervous system is pulled into analysis before reason has even had a chance to intervene. The Stoic lesson becomes even more urgent here. Do not offer sacred mental space to every external movement. Do not let your mind become a public square where every passing signal can demand interpretation. Your attention is too valuable to be spent like this. A fortress does not mean numbness, it means selectivity. It means your mind is not open to invasion from every tone, every silence, every possible implication. You begin asking stronger questions. Does this deserve my attention, or is it simply demanding it? Is this thought helping me act with wisdom, Or is it feeding a cycle of emotional captivity? Am I observing something real, or am I feeding a private theater in my head? These questions restore command because they interrupt automatic fixation. They make attention something chosen rather than stolen. There is also a powerful change that happens when you guard attention well. Your emotions become less available to manipulation because the chain is broken at the beginning. You do not let the mind linger where it should merely notice. You do not turn every sign into a project. You do not feed every uncertainty with more thought. You stop offering repeated mental energy to people and situations that have not earned such a central place in your consciousness. That does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop leaking. The Stoics would see this as a form of dignity. A person with a guarded mind is not easy prey for emotional games. He notices, but he does not obsess. He feels, but he does not surrender the throne of attention. He sees what is there without kneeling before every impression. That changes the rhythm of life. Your work becomes more present. Your rest becomes deeper. Your relationships become cleaner. Your decisions become less contaminated by invisible distractions. Most importantly, your peace becomes harder to reach from the outside because fewer things are allowed to remain inside without permission. And this reveals a hard truth. Many people do not lose themselves because others are overwhelmingly powerful. They lose themselves because they leave the gates open. They allow constant monitoring, constant replay, constant inner conversation with forces that should have been acknowledged and then released. The fortress is not built by never being affected. It is built by refusing to let every disturbance settle in and decorate the place. Once you understand that attention is the first territory, you begin to see why emotional manipulation often works so well. It is not always direct force. Very often it moves through approval, guilt, silence, praise, disappointment, and subtle pressure. These things do not just affect the heart. They first hook the mind. And when the mind is hooked, the emotions soon follow. That is where the next rule begins. Become harder to manipulate, through approval or guilt. Some of the strongest forms of emotional control do not come through obvious aggression. They come through softer instruments that look almost innocent on the surface. Approval, disapproval, praise, silence, guilt, withdrawal, disappointment, a look that makes you feel you have failed, a tone that makes you rush to repair something, a moment of warmth that makes you crave more, a sudden coldness that makes you wonder what you did wrong. These are some of the oldest tools of emotional influence because they do not need force. They work through your need to be accepted, your fear of being rejected, your desire to be seen as good, and your discomfort with disappointing others. If those needs remain unexamined, you become easy to move without anyone ever raising their voice. This is why the Stoics would insist that emotional freedom requires more than patience. It requires inner independence from approval and guilt as systems of control. The moment your peace depends too heavily on being liked, affirmed, praised, forgiven, or emotionally welcomed, you become vulnerable to anyone who knows how to give or remove those things strategically. They do not need to dominate you openly. They only need to understand what you are hungry for. If they know you need reassurance, they can withhold it. If they know you fear being the bad one, they can make you carry blame that is not yours. If they know praise has unusual power over you, they can use it to direct your behavior. At that point, your emotions are no longer guided mainly by principle. They are being guided by reward and pressure. Epictetus would immediately direct your attention to dependence. In the Enchiridion of Epictetus, the central warning is always the same in spirit. If you attach yourself to what is outside your control, you will live in fear and frustration. Approval is outside your control. Other people's emotional satisfaction is outside your control. Their willingness to validate you, understand you, or view you favorably at every moment is outside your control. Guilt, on the other hand, becomes dangerous when you let other people define what you owe beyond what is actually just, reasonable, and virtuous. Many people do not feel guilty because they have violated their conscience. They feel guilty because someone else is dissatisfied, disappointed, or displeased. Those are not the same thing, and confusing them is one of the easiest ways to surrender your inner freedom. This confusion begins early and grows quietly. A person learns that being approved of feels safe. Being praised feels warm. Being seen as kind, loyal, useful, agreeable, and emotionally available feels like security. Then, over time, this preference turns into dependency. They stop asking, "Is this right?" and start asking, "Will this keep me in good standing?" They stop measuring themselves by character and start measuring themselves by reaction. If others are pleased, they feel calm. If others are upset, they feel threatened. If others approve, they feel valuable. If others disapprove, they feel exposed. This is how a human being becomes governable through emotional reward and emotional penalty. Marcus Aurelius points in the opposite direction. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, he repeatedly strips away the glamour of public opinion and the noise of external judgment. He reminds himself that the true measure of a life is not applause, but alignment with nature, reason, and virtue. That is a brutal correction for the modern mind, because many people live as though approval were oxygen. They do not just enjoy it, they psychologically organize themselves around it. They become more careful to preserve the image of goodness than the substance of goodness. They become more concerned with being seen as caring than with acting from wisdom. This makes manipulation easy. A person who fears disapproval too much can be pushed into almost anything. Guilt works in a similar way, but often with even greater force because it disguises manipulation as morality. Someone becomes upset, and you instantly assume you did something wrong. Someone withdraws warmth, and you feel responsible for restoring it. Someone hints at disappointment, and you begin revising your own judgment to escape the discomfort. Someone frames your boundaries as selfishness, your honesty as cruelty, your distance as abandonment, your self-protection as betrayal, and before long you are carrying emotional debt that may never have been yours. This is where guilt becomes a chain rather than a conscience. True conscience clarifies. Manipulated guilt confuses. True conscience points toward what is just. Manipulated guilt pressures you to override yourself for the emotional convenience of others. Seneca would have recognized this trap immediately. In Letters from a Stoic by Seneca, there is a constant call to return to self-command and to refuse captivity to the crowd's unstable judgments. Emotional guilt is often just another unstable judgment entering the mind from outside. It says, if they feel hurt, you must be wrong. If they are displeased, you must repair it. If they withdraw, you must chase. But the Stoic asks a more disciplined question. Have I acted without virtue? Or am I simply being made to feel responsible for another person's emotions, preferences, expectations, or lack of maturity? That distinction is essential. Without it, you will apologize for boundaries, regret necessary honesty, and betray your own clarity just to keep the emotional temperature around you calm. This is why becoming harder to manipulate is not about becoming cruel or indifferent. It is about becoming harder to steer through your hunger for approval and your fear of blame. It is about refusing to be trained like an animal through praise and punishment. Some people become addicted to approval because it covers an inner insecurity. Others become controlled by guilt because they cannot bear the idea of being misunderstood or seen as harsh. Both patterns make the mind externally governed. The Stoic works to remove that leverage. He still values love. He still values trust. He still values good relationships and honorable conduct, but he no longer places his center in the hands of whoever can offer warmth or withdraw it. There is deep power in this shift. You stop rushing to explain yourself every time someone looks disappointed. You stop bending your values to preserve emotional comfort. You stop needing every room to approve of your choices before you can live with them. You stop treating praise as proof that you are right and criticism as proof that you are wrong. Instead, you become more internally measured. You examine yourself honestly. If you acted without integrity, you correct it. If you acted with integrity and someone still disapproves, you endure it without collapsing. That is freedom. It means approval can be pleasant, but it is no longer the ruler. Guilt can be informative, but it is no longer easily weaponized against you. The Stoic knows that many people, even without fully understanding what they are doing, use emotional pressure to preserve their advantage. Approval is given when you are compliant. Coldness appears when you resist. Warmth returns when you abandon your boundary. Disappointment is displayed when you prioritize truth over comfort. Guilt is introduced when you stop serving an emotional role they had quietly assigned to you. If you do not see this pattern, you will keep calling control by a kinder name. You will call it care. You will call it closeness. You will call it emotional complexity. But often it is simpler than that. It is leverage. And once you stop responding automatically to that leverage, the whole structure weakens. The people who once moved you through guilt find less ground. The people who once trained you through approval find you less responsive. The people who expected you to shrink under disapproval meet a steadier presence. This does not mean conflict disappears. In fact, some people become more uncomfortable when their usual tools stop working. But your peace becomes stronger because it is no longer constantly negotiating with external emotional signals. It is rooted in a clearer question: what is right, what is mine to carry, and what must I refuse? That question changes your posture. You begin to walk through life with less craving and less fear. Less craving for praise, less fear of blame, less desperation to be emotionally certified by others, less vulnerability to silent punishments and subtle rewards. You become more difficult to handle through mood, tone, and emotional implication. Not because you no longer care, but because your care has become disciplined. It is no longer available for capture at every signal. This rule matters because many people believe they are simply being kind, understanding, patient, and loving, when in reality they are being steered by their need to be approved of and their fear of making others unhappy. The Stoic path does not harden the heart. It liberates it from low forms of control. It teaches you to love without kneeling, to care without becoming governable, and to act with conscience without surrendering your mind to every emotional pressure placed upon it. And once you begin living from that kind of freedom, only one final step remains. You are no longer merely trying to avoid emotional control. You are ready to take back full command, not over other people, not over circumstances, but over the one place where your sovereignty has always belonged. That is where the final rule begins. Reclaim the throne of your mind. There comes a point when all excuses must end. Not because life becomes easier. Not because people suddenly become fair, mature, honest, and emotionally clean. Not because the world stops testing you. That point comes when you finally see the cost of living without inner sovereignty. You see what it has done to your peace. You see how much of your energy has been spent reacting, explaining, doubting, chasing, replaying, shrinking, anticipating, and emotionally negotiating with forces that were never meant to rule you. You see how many days were shaped by someone else's mood, how many decisions were contaminated by someone else's approval or disapproval, how many wounds stayed open because you kept handing your mind back to what hurt it. And once you see that clearly, one truth becomes impossible to escape. The throne was never supposed to be empty. This is the final Stoic rule because every other rule points here. Stop renting out your inner weather because your mind is not a public climate. Do not confuse someone's behavior with your worth, because your identity is not a verdict handed down by unstable people. Master the space between trigger and reaction, because sovereignty lives in that pause. Stop needing emotional justice from everyone, because peace cannot depend on universal maturity. Never hand your peace to unstable minds, because chaos cannot be your anchor. Learn to be unmoved by performative disrespect, because theater only controls those who step onto its stage. Refuse to make their chaos your identity, because suffering does not get to rename you. Guard your attention like a fortress, because what occupies your mind begins to influence your life. Become harder to manipulate through approval or guilt, because reward and pressure are the favorite tools of those who cannot command you openly. Every one of these lessons leads to the same destination. Take your seat back. The Stoics never promised a life without emotional impact. They were far too honest for that. They knew you would be insulted, misunderstood, disappointed, ignored, betrayed, tested, and tempted. They knew the mind would be pulled by anger, wounded pride, fear, loneliness, desire, insecurity, and grief. But they also knew something many people still refuse to accept. None of those things have the final word unless you keep surrendering the seat of judgment. Epictetus built his entire philosophy around this reality. In the Enchiridion of Epictetus, section 1, he forces the distinction between what is yours and what is not. If your mind is yours, then rule it. If your judgments are yours, then examine them. If your reactions are yours, then refine them. If your peace is yours, then stop offering it to every passing hand. Marcus Aurelius lived inside pressure that most people could barely imagine. War, betrayal, political strain, illness, death, responsibility without rest, and yet he kept returning to the same principle in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. Return to the ruling faculty. Return to the part of yourself that can still choose. Return to the place that can say yes or no to impressions. Return to the inner seat that remains yours, even when the world becomes noisy, hostile, unfair, and unstable. That is what it means to reclaim the throne of your mind. It means you stop living as though your inner state were an accident produced by external behavior. You start living as a deliberate governor of your own soul. This does not happen in one perfect moment. It happens in a series of quiet revolutions. The next time someone speaks coldly, and you do not let their mood become your atmosphere, the throne is reclaimed a little. The next time someone disrespects you, and you refuse to turn it into self-doubt, the throne is reclaimed a little. The next time the trigger comes and you pause before reacting, the throne is reclaimed a little. The next time a manipulative silence fails to drag you into panic, the throne is reclaimed a little. The next time guilt knocks and you ask whether it is truly conscience or merely pressure, the throne is reclaimed a little. Rule is restored this way, not through fantasy, but through repeated acts of inner government. And that is what most people never understand. Emotional freedom is not a feeling that arrives one morning and stays forever. It is a discipline of rulership. It is built the way a kingdom is defended, with vigilance, discernment, standards, memory, and command. If you neglect it, lesser forces fill the vacuum. Opinions take power, fear takes power, neediness takes power, unstable people take power, old wounds take power, pride takes power, approval takes power, guilt takes power. But when you remain awake, when you keep returning to judgment, attention, and self-command, the throne stops being symbolic. It becomes functional. It becomes the place from which you actually live. Seneca knew this when he wrote of the wise person as someone whose good is rooted within and therefore cannot be easily plundered by fortune or by the behavior of others. That does not mean the wise person never suffers. It means suffering does not become a hostile takeover. Pain may visit, but it does not get crowned. Grief may enter, but it does not become ruler. Rejection may sting, but it does not write law inside the soul. Criticism may arrive, but it does not seize authority over identity. This is the dignity of Stoicism. Not invulnerability, but sovereignty. Not the absence of feeling, but the refusal to let feeling dethrone reason. There is also a harder truth buried here. If you do not reclaim the throne of your mind, someone else always will try to sit on it. Perhaps not with obvious cruelty. Perhaps not with conscious malice. Sometimes it will be a parent's expectations. Sometimes a partner's instability. Sometimes a stranger's disrespect. Sometimes a boss's approval. Sometimes an audience. Sometimes a comment section. Sometimes your own wounded past speaking in the voice of old shame. The contenders are many. The throne is always desired because the human mind is powerful. Whoever influences it, influences emotion. Whoever influences emotion, influences action. Whoever influences action begins to shape the course of a life. That is why reclaiming your mind is not a luxury. It is one of the most necessary acts of adulthood. So what does it look like in practice? It looks like no longer asking the world for permission to be okay. It looks like not needing everyone to understand you before you trust your own judgment. It looks like refusing to explain yourself to every person committed to misunderstanding you. It looks like seeing someone's instability and deciding not to build your emotional home inside it. It looks like meeting provocation without becoming easy to move. It looks like letting praise pass through you without addiction and letting criticism pass through you without collapse. It looks like living with a quieter nervous system because your peace is no longer for sale. Most people spend years trying to control other people so they can finally feel calm. The Stoic goes in the opposite direction. He gives up the fantasy of controlling others and takes responsibility for governing himself. That is the great reversal, and it is why Stoicism remains dangerous in the best possible way. It produces people who cannot be ruled cheaply, people who cannot be baited so easily, people who do not surrender their identity at the first sign of rejection, people who stop begging life to become softer and instead become inwardly stronger. That kind of person is difficult to manipulate because he has already settled the essential question: my mind belongs to me. And once that truth becomes real, not as an idea, but as a lived posture, something inside you changes permanently. You stop feeling like the world is constantly happening to you. You stop feeling like every interaction has the power to rearrange you. You stop walking through life as open territory for the moods, wounds, and games of others. You become more rooted, more selective, more disciplined, more free. Not perfect, not untouchable, but governed. That is the destination of all these rules. Not numbness, not pride, not isolation. Freedom. The kind that cannot be granted by applause and cannot be taken by disrespect. The kind that remains when approval disappears, when unfairness appears, when manipulation fails, and when other people try to hand you identities that were never yours. The kind of freedom Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca kept pointing toward in different words, the freedom of the person who has learned to live from the inside out. The world will keep testing your mind. People will keep trying to enter places they have not earned. Some through affection, some through fear, some through judgment, some through chaos. But from this point on, let the answer become clear. The throne is occupied. Your peace is no longer available for rule by every passing force. Your emotions are no longer common ground. Your mind has an owner again.